Mr. Ferry. We will go back to the war in a minute, and the affiliation between the two competing Mexican groups, but I first want to touch upon the AB, the Aryan Brotherhood. What is this organization, Mr. Hankins? This is a group of white inmates, and it is known as the Aryan Brotherhood now, but you can take it back many years ago and it is an old Nazi-oriented group. It was first the Bluebird Gang, and it became the Nazis, and now is the Aryan Brotherhood. They are against blacks. Is it primarily a racist organization? Mr. Hankins. Yes. What would be their number? The number of Aryan Brotherhood members at San Quentin? Mr. Hankins. At San Quentin now, there are probably 35 to 40. What would it be system-wide? Mr. Hankins. System-wide, probably in the area of 400 to 500. What would be their outside contacts? Do they have any in particular, Mr. Hankins? Their primary contact on the outside is with the Manson family. The Charles Manson family. Mr. Hankins. That is correct. What nature? Mr. Hankins. Through the girls in the Manson family. This is primarily a drug connection, but they also are aligned with the Mexican mafia for this purpose also. How is this as an organization? How is it set up? Do you have a leader at the top, Mr. Hankins? Yes, you have what they call a general, and we have identified him as Jack Mahoney, who is serving time at Folsom, I believe at this time. There is no known black. The stature in this organization is probably gained through violent acts. How violent they are. How many violent acts they have been involved in, and that gives you status with the organization. What would be the membership requirements to join Aryan Brotherhood? It takes a vote by the entire organization throughout the system and final approval by the general. Is there any initiation? If you have the background, they are going to look at you. If you are interested in joining, you will have the background they are looking for already, which would go along with the violence. Primarily they are a racist organization. Mr. Hankins. Yes, an organization of that nature? Mr. Hankins. Yes. Do they have any working relationship with the Mexican mafia, Mr. Hankins? Yes, they have aligned themselves with the mafia in the war against the family. With the mafia, I also feel that this is a drug connection. Do they have any other basis on which they carry out the acts for the mafia? Mr. Hankins. Yes. They carry out numerous contracts, or hits on family members for the mafia, so they are in the war with the mafia. They are carrying hit contracts against the family. Mr. Hankins. That is correct. Besides that, there is the drug relationship, you say? Yes. Would you characterize the Aryan Brotherhood as in any way affiliated with the Marxist-Leninist ideology, Mr. Hankins? I could not tell you that definitely, but it is racist. What about the Church of the New Song? Is there any relationship between the Aryan Brotherhood and that organization? Mr. Hankins. There are members of the Aryan Brotherhood who are members of the Church of the New Song. What is it exactly, Mr. Hankins? This is a newer religious group. It sprung up, I believe, in a penitentiary in Atlanta. Part of their religious ceremonies call for the serving of porterhouse steak and Harvey S. Bristol cream sherry. Have they been recognized by the state of California as a religious organization yet? No, there are no plans to furnish the steaks to your knowledge? No, not to my knowledge. What would be the number of members of the Church of the New Song at San Quentin? I believe we have 19 members. What would you say are the objectives and goals of this organization? I really don't know at this time. Since they first became known to us, they have filed numerous writs with the courts. They are awaiting court action now on some of the writs they have now. What about the individual members? Can you characterize them? The makeup of this group is very violent. I believe 7 or 8 of the members are ex-condemned men off condemned row, and the others, if you check, you will find that they have been convicted of many crimes both in and outside of the system. Is there any connection between the Church of the New Song and the Polar Bear Party, Mr. Hankins? Many members of the Church of the New Song belong to the Polar Bear Party. What is it exactly, Mr. Hankins? This started out as a predominantly white group, which would go along with the Aryan Brotherhood philosophy. I think the Minister of Information. I have a letter here that he had sent out to the United Prisoners Union, wherein he states, "We are a politically oriented group with the aim of raising the conscience of our brothers here inside in order to promote prison reform and fight for the abolishment of prisons entirely." Of course, this has changed. A lot of their philosophy in this group has changed. What would it have changed to? Mr. Hankins. The Polar Bear Party has joined in with the Venceremos organization, and has established contact with the Venceremos organization members within the prison. I hand you exhibit number 9 and ask you to identify that. Mr. Hankins. Yes, this is a letter I picked up coming into Michael Shane Guile, who is the Minister of Information for the Polar Bear Party. It is from Caesar Moore, co-chairman of the Venceremos Prison Committee. What is the enclosure there with that letter, Mr. Hankins? The principles of unity of the Venceremos organization. There is another letter attached thereto. Would you also explain that one briefly, Mr. Hankins? This is a letter which was coming from Andrea Hallman, who is in San Bernardino County Jail pending trial, which is addressed to Michael Guile, but it was going through the United Prisoners Union. They were using the Prisoners Union as a mail drop. Who is Andrea Hallman, Mr. Hankins? She is one of the defendants who was recently convicted in San Bernardino for the murder of the officer in the escape of an inmate by the name of Beatty from Chino. She is affiliated with the United Prisoners Union? Did that information come out in the trial? Mr. Hankins. She is a member of the Venceremos organization, but it is going to the United Prisoners Union, Mr. Hankins. Yes, this particular letter that she had sent to Michael Shane Guile, in care of the United Prisoners Union, 3077 24th Street, San Francisco, California. They, in turn, enclosed it in one of their envelopes, and a man by the name of Sam Brooks included a little note to Guile explaining what it was, and in turn sent it on to Guile. What was the salutation from Brooks to Guile? He starts with "Hi comrade," and he ends off with "Power to the convicted class in revolutionary struggle and unity, Venceremos." And he signs it Sam. So this information came into Guile, who is with the Polar Bear Party. That is correct. Is that part of the basis for saying that the Polar Bear Party has now become somewhat revolutionary, at least that they are showing political signs in that sense? They have pretty much aligned themselves with the Venceremos organization. How large is the Polar Bear Party? How many members, Mr. Hankins? I would say approximately at this time 20, but they are recruiting heavily now. Part of the communication between the Venceremos and the Polar Bear Party was that they would have to change their philosophy, the Polar Bear philosophy, as far as their feelings against blacks went. Venceremos had no racial restrictions whatsoever. At this time, I would like to introduce exhibit number 9. A letter pertaining to the Venceremos organization contact with the Polar Bear Party Chairman Icord. So admitted. See Appendix A. I believe that one of the letters in that exhibit describes the Marxist study group in San Quentin, does it not? Let me hand it back to you, and on page 2, if you will note those portions that are marked. Mr. Hankins. Yes. It says, "We recently initiated a Marxist study group with emphasis on material dialectics. During the week each group member studies from the same material, book, pamphlet, etc. Then on the weekend when the group meets we discuss, criticize, etc. the material read and studied the previous week. Some of the books we are working with are all basic introduction types, e.g. Engels' The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State, Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, Huberman S. and Sweezy S. Introduction to Socialism, Lenin S. Teachings of Karl Marx, State and Revolution, Imperialism, The Highest Stage of Capitalism. We also have some more academic works like Cornforth's Materialism and the Dialectical Method, Historical Materialism, etc. And of course we have a lot of other very relevant books such as Che's Complete Writings, The Red Book, The Communist Manifesto and others. That was in the letter from Moore to Guile. Is that correct? This was from Guile to Andrea Hallman. Then one of the contacts to the Polar Bear Party has been the United Prisoners Union. What is this? Mr. Hankins. This is an organization formed by Popeye Jackson, Wilbur Jackson, It is made up of ex-cons, parolees, and incarcerated inmates. What are its objectives and goals, Mr. Hankins? The expressed purpose of the organization is the formation of a prisoner class union composed of inmates, and with a strong union they hope to make successful their demands for the application of minimum wage to convicts, visiting, and many other privileges. UPU is also active in the Chino Defense Committee, and has recently become involved in the Venceremos organization. Do the inmates purchase memberships, or help finance activities of UPU, to your knowledge? In some cases. The majority of memberships in UPU is normally through sponsorship of a person outside. How would that work? Can you explain it, please? If an inmate is interested in joining, they will find somebody outside who puts up the money for sponsorship, so the dues are paid from the outside? That is correct. How would you characterize the United Prisoners Union? Very radical and revolutionary in nature. They are very close, if not completely dominated by the Venceremos organization. It appears from the previous exhibit that they are using this United Prisoners Union as a mail drop? Yes. What other primary activities? Recruitment? Yes. Recruitment. People on the outside make appearances at court trials. I would say that their primary function right now is recruitment. I hand you exhibit number 10, and I will ask you to identify it, please. Is that a piece of literature from the United Prisoners Union? Yes. This is a paper called The Anvil, put out by the United Prisoners Union. What is the location of that particular office, does it say? Anvil Office, 3077 24th Street, San Francisco, California. In previous testimony before this committee, there have been several references to an organization called the Prisoners Union. Are you familiar with that? I recently became familiar with this organization. I hand you exhibit number 11, and I ask you to identify that, please. Mr. Hankins. This is a paper put out by the Prisoners Union called The Outlaw. What is the connection, then, between the Prisoners Union and the United Prisoners Union, Mr. Hankins? They are two similar organizations. Members of the Prisoners Union and staff were formerly with the United Prisoners Union also. Then, has there been a split? It would appear that way. In my personal opinion, I don't feel that it definitely is a separate group. Why? I just feel that Wilbur Jackson would not allow the split to happen. Would one cater to black inmates and the other to white? Mr. Hankins. That is possible. I believe that Connor Nixon and John Irwin are affiliated with the Prisoners Union, and both of them are white. I know through experience in talking to inmates, we have many Caucasian inmates who do not want to join the group. You mentioned Connor Nixon? Yes, as being affiliated with Mr. Hankins. He is affiliated with the Outlaw. Chairman Icord. Counsel, at this point, what was the name of the Prisoners Union organization which we encountered in the state of Ohio? It was the Ohio Prisoners Labor Union. Chairman Icord. Was he connected with that Prisoners Union? I think the information was that there is a connection, that the individual that this witness has just mentioned, Connor Nixon, did come to Ohio, if you recall, and was used by Raymond Twohig as a legal investigator. He obtained the authorization to visit the various institutions in Ohio on behalf of Raymond Twohig. Chairman Icord. Was he associated with the Lawyers Guild? That is correct. At this time I would like to introduce two exhibits into the record, exhibits numbers 10 and 11, the publications of the United Prisoners Union and the Prisoners Union. Chairman Icord. So admitted. Exhibits numbers 10 and 11 were retained in the committee files. Do you have an organization in California by the name of Prisoners Solidarity Committee? We have had contact some time back with that organization. Is it active now? Not to my knowledge. No. Would you know its affiliation as an organization, the post office box number they had, and the person writing from this post office box, as I recall, was a Pam Waldo. The box was, as I recall, rented to, deleted. The individual you previously mentioned? That is correct. What organization was she previously mentioned with, Mr. Hankins? Her association with the Venceremos, and her involvement with the Mexican Mafia. Now, I hand you committee exhibit number 12, and ask you what this is, please. Yes, this is a list of the delegates to the National Lawyers Guild Convention, held in Austin, Texas, February 15 through 19, 1973, from the Bay Area. Also included is the National Lawyers Guild Prison Position Paper. Would you read that introduction to the National Lawyers Guild Prison Position Paper, that indented portion there? What does it state? At the last NEB in San Diego, members of the LA Guild Prison Committee took the responsibility for writing a position paper to be used as a basis for a discussion of a guild strategy. The following is that position paper. Prisoners are the revolutionary vanguard of our struggle. When prisoners come out, they will lead us in the streets, because they have experienced the most blatant oppression that this system can produce. The farther back in the hole you go, the more militant and revolutionary you will be, because you will have experienced the most violent forms of oppression. Look at Cleaver, Huey Newton, Malcolm X, Ho Chi Minh, George Jackson. All of these convicts wrote their most revolutionary pieces while inside the joint. Prisoners are going to lead the revolution because prisoners realize what it means to have a revolution, because they have lived under the forces of the reactionaries for years. I hand you exhibit number 13, and I ask you to identify this, please. Mr. Hankins. This is a newspaper called The Conspiracy, and it is put out by the National Lawyers Guild. Both of those documents, did they come to San Quentin? Yes. They did. I hand you exhibit number 14, and ask you if you can identify that, please. Yes. This is a booklet put out by the Prison Law Collective, which is the affiliate of the National Lawyers Guild in San Francisco. It is called The Jailhouse Lawyer's Manual, How to Bring a Federal Suit Against Abuses in Prison. May I have those 3 documents? Mr. Chairman, one would like to introduce these into the record. Chairman Icord. So admitted. Exhibits numbers 12, 13, and 14 were retained in committee files. Would you explain where the National Lawyers Guild is located? Their office is at 558 Cap Street in San Francisco, California. What is the principal activity of the National Lawyers Guild? It is a national organization of attorneys and legal volunteers who perform community services, political prisoner defense work, and similar activities. Prior to demonstrations, the local chapter of the National Lawyers Guild often organizes legal aid systems to provide legal services and bail and representation for arrested demonstrators. Many demonstrators will have the legal aid's phone number written on their legs and arms. The San Francisco chapter is very active in defense committees, and has been currently holding classes in street law at the various law schools. Has there been any upsurge of class action suits? Yes. There have. Have these been instigated by the National Lawyers Guild, to your information? Yes. What then is the relationship of the National Lawyers Guild with the Prison Law Collective? The Prison Law Collective is an affiliate of the National Lawyers Guild in San Francisco. What is the affiliation with the UPU, the United Prisoners Union? There is a close tie between the two groups. To your knowledge, it is a close tie, I would say, primarily through their contact with the Venceremos organization. That is the National Lawyers Guild with the Venceremos organization. Is that correct? Yes. You mentioned previously Caesar Moore. Mr. Hankins is a staff member of the Prison Law Collective. Is he also a National Lawyers Guild member? They are one and the same. Who would be the principal activist of the National Lawyers Guild in relation to the prison? Our primary problems from this law collective at this time come from the attorneys Patty Roberts, Paul Albert, Lloyd Abner, and various staff members under Castro. I hand you exhibit number 15 and I ask you if you can identify it, please. Mr. Hankins. Yes. This is a copy of a letter addressed to an inmate at San Quentin from the National Lawyers Guild, San Francisco Bay Area Chapter 558 Cap Street, San Francisco, California, and marked as legal mail. Since it did not bear a recognized lawyer's signature on the outside, it did not meet the requirements of legal mail and was subject to censorship. This letter assures the inmate that he has the full support of the NLG office in his legal battles and signs itself Unidos Venceremos. Yours in the struggle. The letter includes a listing of the pamphlets available from the People's Law School, 558 Cap Street, San Francisco, California, and a list of services available to prisoners. For example, it notes that the Connecticut General Life Insurance Company, Hartford, Connecticut, has a free photocopy service for prisoners. I hand you exhibit number 16 and I will ask you to identify it, please. Mr. Hankins. Yes. This is a report on a strike that took place in Folsom Prison in November of 1970. What does that have to state in relation to the National Lawyers Guild? I believe I am not incorrect that there is reference to the Folsom demands having been initiated by the National Lawyers Guild. Yes. There is mentioned here, the National Lawyers Guild, who will do the bulk of our negotiating, feels that the administration will be ready to come to terms after Wednesday. Their feelings are that, the longer we remain down on strike, the better our chances of complete victory. This is then in relation to the Folsom strike of 1970? Mr. Hankins. Yes. Is that when the Folsom Manifesto was issued? Yes. What was the summary of that particular report pertaining to the activities of the personnel? I believe that there is a summary that is relevant, if you will note that, please. Mr. Hankins. Yes, in summary, this incident, which lasted for 18 days, was handled in the usual exemplary fashion by personnel of all levels and classification. Although many worked long and tiring hours, they managed to maintain a good relationship between staff and inmates, which enabled the institution to return to a state of normalcy quickly and without bitterness. Damage was almost non-existent, and the only use of force involved a man in the A/C attacking personnel on 2 separate occasions. A great deal of evidence indicates this man was acting on the advice and prompting of his attorney. He and several others are believed to have encouraged their clients to create situations to be used to discredit personnel. This incident differed from others in that inmates had almost unlimited access to the news broadcasts with transistor radios, and at least one station, KZAP, in Sacramento, did everything possible to continue the lock-up by supplying distorted and sometimes untruthful news. The attorneys and/or their representatives referred to earlier in this report presented an entirely new and unexpected problem as indicated throughout this report. Unless some way is found to hold these people responsible for dishonest and unethical conduct, then the Department of Corrections can almost certainly expect similar incidents in other facilities. Since that time, have you in fact experienced those types of activities? We have had similar incidents occur since. Involving National Lawyers Guild member lawyers? Yes. We are certain of this. Hand me the exhibit, please. You have mentioned various times the Venceremos organization. I would like to introduce exhibit number 16, with report of the Folsom strike in relationship to the National Lawyers Guild Chairman Icord. It is received. See Appendix A. How would you characterize the Venceremos as an organization, Mr. Hankins? I would characterize it as probably the most dangerous group there is in existence right now on the streets. Would you say that it is a Marxist, Leninist organization? Mr. Hankins. Yes. How do they maintain contacts with inmates? Mr. Hankins. Correspondence, newspapers, attorney contacts. Do you have them visiting inmates? We have, yes. Did you ever review the visitation records to determine who some of the Venceremos members were? Yes, we have. Do you have a list of those members, sir? Mr. Hankins. I know from my own personal knowledge who some of them were. Who were they? Mr. Hankins. Eleanor Kaplan. Katerina Del Valle. What would be their primary activities? Recruitment. What type of inmate are they trying to recruit? Mr. Hankins. The more violent inmates. I have it from inmate sources that they have notified inmates that they would assist in the escape of certain inmates, who were trained in explosives and such. I think you can verify their assistance in escapes, their involvement in escapes, and you can turn to the Beatty case, and the convictions of the VO members involved so far. What is the Beatty case? Mr. Hankins. This was an escape of an inmate who was en route to court from Chino. Upon leaving prison, they went a short distance, and the car was stopped by 2 cars. One officer was shot and killed, and the other one was wounded, and the prisoner was taken. Did that trial recently end in the conviction of 2 individuals? Yes. There are still 2 awaiting trial. That resulted from the original indictment? That is correct. During the course of that trial, was there any evidence pertaining to the Venceremos organization? Mr. Hankins. Yes. I hand you exhibit number 17, and ask you to identify that, please, Mr. Hankins. Yes. This was a pamphlet that was passed out outside the gates at San Quentin. This particular one was picked up on June 30th of this year, and it pertains to the Chino escape, calling it a frame-up. That is in reference to the Beatty case. Is that correct? Yes. Does that indicate who the defendants were? Yes. It has the pictures in there of the 4 defendants. Andrea Hallman Burt. Is she the individual previously identified as being a member of the Venceremos? Mr. Hankins, continuing. Yes, Benton Douglas Burt, Bob C. Bach, and Jean Hobson. Who publishes this particular leaflet? If you will turn to the next page. It says back here, and they are the defense committees. They list the addresses, and they list for the San Francisco location, the office of the United Prisoners Union. We will go into the Beatty case again a little later, but right at this moment, is it your understanding that the Venceremos organization was involved with this breakout? Yes. Was it so stated at the trial? Mr. Hankins. Yes. It was proven at the trial. I believe so. This was the Venceremos organization? Mr. Hankins. Venceremos members were involved in the escape and murder of the officer. Take the Venceremos organization, then. You previously mentioned their attempts to affiliate with the Polar Bear Party. Is that correct? Mr. Hankins. Yes. There was a previous attempt to effectuate a truce between the 2 warring Mexican families. Mr. Hankins. That is right. What is this leading to, Mr. Hankins? Everything, in my opinion, seems to be pointing toward the Venceremos organization. Everything I come across seems to be showing the Venceremos organization having their fingers into it, and trying to draw them, so to speak, toward them. Even in this exhibit number 17, on page 8, it indicates that the sponsors of this particular leaflet are October League, Revolutionary Union, Spartacist League, Venceremos Study Groups, Vietnam Veterans Against the War, and the United Prisoners Union. Mr. Hankins. That is correct. I would like to introduce exhibit number 17 into the record. Chairman Icord. It is received. See Appendix A. Have you had a great influx of literature coming into the inmates? Yes. In recent years, yes. I hand you exhibit number 18, and I ask you to identify this, if you would, please. Yes. These are orders of books coming into the institution. Where is the first leaflet from? What is indicated? The first one is from Pathfinder Press, Incorporated, 410 West Street, New York, NY. Do you want me to read it? Yes. Do read that, if you would, please. The next one is an invoice from China Books and Periodicals, 2929 24th Street, San Francisco, California. It shows that the below-listed books were sold to the Committee for Prisoner Humanity and Justice, 1029 4th Street, Room 37, San Rafael, California. They were shipped to an inmate, Glenn Jodisha Davis at San Quentin. The titles of the books are Quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong and Venceremos. I believe you also have a list of books. What is that in relation to? Mr. Hankins. This is a list of books that were in George Jackson's property when we went over his property on August 21, 1971. Is that the same George Jackson who was killed? Mr. Hankins. Yes. He was killed and 3 officers were killed. Would you give me a random sampling of some of the titles? To Be Free, by Herbert A. Thacker. Revolutionary Priest by Camilo Torres. Black Skin, White Masks, Frantz Fanon. Mao Zedong. What was the total number of books found there? Mr. Hankins. There were several lists. On this particular list, and there were others too, there were 99 books. The titles that you read Would they be a representative sample of the nature of the books contained in the property? Yes. The pink sheet there is from the International Publishers Company. Is that correct? Yes. At this time I would like to introduce Exhibit Number 18, Chairman Accord. The document will be admitted. The list of books that were the property of George Jackson is reproduced in Appendix A, pages 1389 to 1398. The International Publishers brochure appears in Appendix A, page 1399. The remaining documents comprising Exhibit Number 18 were retained in committee files. Let me ask you a question. Based on your experience with the correctional facilities and your knowledge of inmates, what is the effect of literature of this nature on inmates? Mr. Hankins. I believe that it incites them to acts of violence. What would you say the effect is on rehabilitation of inmates? Very damaging. What about its effect on correction personnel? I believe that it upsets correction personnel. Then there is definitely a morale factor. For one thing, things of this nature are allowed in, and they become more subject to be insulted by inmates, this type of thing. Do you believe that there has been a change in inmate attitude toward correction personnel as a result of this literature? Yes, Chairman Accord. Before you get into anything else, how much longer do you believe it will take to finish your questioning? Will it be necessary to have an executive session with the sergeant? I have about 2 questions, and we will need a very short executive session. Chairman Accord. It will be necessary to have the executive session this afternoon, because it is necessary for the chair to be on the floor before the House convenes. So, I would suggest that you go ahead and ask your 2 questions, finish your questioning in open session. We will continue with the executive session first thing this afternoon. I would announce that the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Geyer, will open the committee hearing at 1:30 p.m. I will try to be there, but it will be necessary for me to stay on the floor during at least part of the time this afternoon. Yes, sir, thank you. You seem to have a considerable amount of knowledge about the Venceremos, Mr. Hankins. In the knowledge you have regarding the Venceremos, what have you used as a reference point on the Venceremos organization? I have primarily used one of your own reports here. It has been of tremendous value to me in identification. Also in reading this, I use it for training purposes, and I recommend the reading of it to all the members of the staff. It has helped me in my work tremendously. Do you find that book accurate? Very much so. No discrepancies that you have found, is that it? None that I found. Mr. Chairman, one think really that this is the extent of my public questioning of this witness. Chairman Accord. Thank you very much, Mr. Counsel. Thank you, Sergeant, for your appearance before the committee today. You know your subject, and you have articulated it well before this committee. Let me ask you this question. I have been concerned about the lack of knowledge of several correctional officials with whom we come in contact, concerning the various organizations that they are dealing with in the prison system, and as you have testified, outside the prison system. The correctional officials are dealing with organizations and forces that certainly constitute a great danger to the security of the institution, and in order to deal effectively with those forces and organizations you have to know what you are dealing with. Have you, or any of your superiors, established an educational program within the correctional department within the state of California? Yes. We have constant training. We do have academies, which I have instructed at. Chairman Accord. That is your responsibility? You are in charge of that program? No. I am not in charge of it, but I have instructed there. Chairman Accord. One more question, and then we will continue in executive session at 1:30, because I think that some of that testimony does concern Rule 27M. Do you have indications in the California system either within your particular facility that you are associated with, or in the entire correctional system, involving court actions concerning censorship of material coming into the institution? Not to my knowledge. Chairman Accord. I am sure that you anticipate getting into court on some of your censorship activities, do you not? Yes. I feel that this will eventually come. Chairman Accord. May I make a suggestion for the record, then? If and when you do get involved in such cases, I would hope that the lawyers for the Department of Corrections, particularly if they are involved with revolutionary censorship or inflammatory literature, that they call upon you to give some expert testimony in this area. I have not studied evidence that has been submitted in all of the cases that have been decided in this area, but I am quite sure that many of the cases have been decided in the courts in an informational void. You cannot decide these matters in an intellectual vacuum, as I have indicated before, because you are dealing with some very powerful forces and organizations. I believe that testimony, which would be admissible in the case of revolutionary or inflammatory literature in most jurisdictions anyway, would have led to different decisions if such evidence had been made available to the courts. In that regard, Mr. Counsel, although we are approaching the end of these hearings, I am still not sure as to what legislation would fall within the mandate of this committee that would help alleviate problems which correctional institutions are facing. I think that probably the greatest deficiency that we have encountered is a lack of information on the part of the correctional officials about these organizations and the forces that are at work. I think the staff should be thinking toward a possibility of condensing evidence that we have taken during these hearings and perhaps making that available to the correctional institutions throughout the country. Let me ask you this, Sergeant. Do you have an exchange of intelligence information? Of course you do. In the state of California, do you exchange intelligence information with other state correctional institutions? Do you have any national organization that performs that function? No. Not to my knowledge, Chairman Icord. Then certainly, this is a deficiency, Mr. Counsel, and I think this is probably the greatest contribution that we can make as a result of these hearings. I believe that our next witness, Mr. Procunier, will have some comments on that very subject, and will have some suggestions that the committee may be interested in. Chairman Icord. Thank you again, Sergeant. Your testimony has been a great addition to the committee. With that, the meeting will be adjourned until 1:30 p.m.